Welcome back to the Science Channel podcast, where we discuss the coolest scientific papers and preprints of our day.
It's great to be back.
And hey, if you're finding these deep dives into the latest research valuable, please do hit that like button and subscribe. It really helps us grow the channel and bring you more of this stuff.
Definitely helps. So today, we're tackling something really fascinating, I think, at the forefront of longevity research.
Okay.
It's this question. How can we not just live longer, but make sure those extra years are actually, healthy ones?
Oh, the health span versus lifespan question.
Exactly. And the core idea we'll be digging into is called compression of morbidity.
Compression of morbidity. Okay, sounds technical but important. What's the basic idea there?
Well, essentially, in gerontology, the ideal scenario isn't just stretching out life indefinitely. It's more about squeezing that period of sickness, of disability, or what people often call the sick span, squeezing that into a really short window right at the very end of life.
So like instead of a long, slow decline.
Exactly. The opposite of that. You'd have ideally many more healthy, active years and then a relatively quick decline just before the end.
That makes a lot of intuitive sense. I mean, that's probably what most people would want, right?
I think so, yeah. Achieving this wouldn't just be huge for individual quality of life, but think about the potential impact on, say, healthcare systems, less long-term burden.
Huge implications. And there's some new research on this, isn't there? That's what we're diving into.
There is, yeah. We're going to look at a recent paper. It's by Yang and colleagues, published in Nature Communications.
Okay.
And this paper puts forward a really compelling theory, actually, about what kinds of interventions, things aimed at increasing lifespan are most likely to actually achieve this compression of morbidity we're talking about.
All right, so what's the theory? What's the core argument they're making?
So the main idea is quite elegant, really. They propose that the shape of the survival curve.
The survival curve. Okay, remind me. That's like the graph showing what percentage of a population is still alive at different ages.
Precisely that graph. They're saying the shape of that curve can actually predict whether a specific longevity intervention will compress the sick span or not.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
How can this shape tell you about health? That seems indirect.
Well, here's their argument. If an intervention just extends the average lifespan but keeps the overall shape of that survival curve the same, they call it this scaling, then the prediction is the sick period also gets stretched out proportionally.
Ah. Okay, so like stretching a rubber band, you said.
Yeah.
Everything gets longer, but the proportions stay the same.
Exactly like that. So you might live longer, yes, but you might also spend proportionally just as much or even more actual time being sick at the end.
Which is not really the goal we're aiming for.
Not the ideal, no. But they contrast this with another type of intervention. These are ones that don't just increase lifespan, but they also make the survival curve steeper.
Yeah.
More rectangular is how it's often described.
Steeper. Meaning more people survive to an older age, and then the drop-off is faster.
That's the idea, yes. A larger proportion of the population makes it to an advanced age, presumably in better health, and then there's a more rapid decline phase for the population as a whole.
Okay, so those interventions.
Yeah.
What do they predict happens to the sick span?
Their prediction is that these are the interventions that are likely to actually compress the sick span, make that period of illness shorter relative to the total lifespan.
Interesting. So it's not just if you extend life, but how the population's survival pattern changes.
Precisely. It suggests a more, maybe, uniform or robust aging experience across the population, delaying frailty for longer.
Okay, that's a powerful idea. Is this just like an observation, or is there a mechanism behind it?
It's rooted in theory. It comes from a mathematical model of aging they use called the saturating removal model.
Saturating removal model. Okay. Sounds complex. Can you break that down a bit?
Yeah, let's try.
Yeah.
In essence, the model tries to capture mathematically this ongoing process where damage accumulates in our bodies over time.
Right. Wear and tear.
Wear and tear, cellular damage, all that stuff. But it also includes the body's mechanisms for repairing or removing that damage.
Oh, accumulation and repair.
But a key part is that as we age, damage keeps building up, and maybe our repair systems get less efficient, or they just get overwhelmed, they saturate.
Saturate, what they can't keep up anymore.
Exactly, they hit a limit. Now, this model connects that process to survival. It predicts that interventions, which mainly just slow down the rate damage happens, tend to cause that scaling effect on the survival curve.
Just stretches it out.
Right. But interventions that, say, enhance the removal of damage or maybe increase our tolerance to damage, basically, raising the bar for how much damage leads to death.
Okay.
Those interventions, the model predicts, are more likely to lead to that steeper, more rectangular survival curve.
And they extended this model to sickness, too.
They did. They added a threshold for morbidity, basically, the point where accumulated damage crosses a line and leads to significant sickness or frailty.
And the model suggests these steepening interventions, the ones that maybe boost repair or tolerance, are the ones that push that sickness threshold closer to the end of life.
That's exactly what the model predicts. More healthy time before hitting that morbidity threshold.
Okay, that's a compelling theoretical link. But theory is one thing. Did they look for evidence?
Absolutely crucial step. Yes, they did. They didn't just rely on the math. They went looking for real-world data from experiments on model organisms.
Like mice and worms.
Yep. Mice, the nematode worm C. elegans, and also fruit flies, Drosophila melanogaster. They gathered existing data from studies where different longevity interventions had been tried and where researchers had also tracked the health or frailty of these organisms over their lives.
So they could see if the interventions that actually steepen the survival curve in practice also seem to shorten the relative sick span.
That was the goal, to see if the real-world biology matched the model's predictions.
And it did it. What did they find in the animal data?
Well, for the most part, yeah, the evidence seemed to line up pretty well with the theory.
Really?
Yes. In these animal models, interventions that were associated with making that survival curve steeper generally also showed signs of compressing the relative sick span, a shorter period of being unwell at the end, compared to the total lifespan.
And the scaling ones?
Yeah.
The ones that just stretched the curve?
Those tended to result in a proportional increase in the duration of sickness, just as the model predicted, live longer, but sick for proportionally just as long.
Wow. That's actually a really significant finding, isn't it?
I think it is, yeah.
So for us listening, I mean, whether you're working in this field or just, curious about how we might live healthier for longer, this research offers a whole new way to look at different approaches, right?
It really does. It suggests that when we're evaluating ways to extend life, we need to look beyond just the average lifespan number. Not all extra years might be created equal in terms of health.
So understanding how an intervention changes that survival curve shape,
yeah,
that could be key.
It could be a really important indicator, yeah. It might help predict whether a therapy is likely to give us more genuinely healthy years with the decline phase pushed towards the very end.
Like a biomarker for compression of morbidity potential.
Potentially, yes. It offers a framework, at least, for thinking about the quality of the extra life gained, not just the quantity.
Okay, let me try to recap this then. This research, Yang et al. In Nature Comms, proposes the survival curve shape predicts sick span compression.
Mm-hmm.
Interventions that just scale the curve stretch out both lifespan and sick span.
Proportionally, yes.
But interventions that steepen the curve make it more rectangular. They extend lifespan and seem to compress the relative sick span. More healthy years.
That's the core idea.
And this isn't just theory. It's backed up, at least preliminarily, by data from experiments in mice, worms, and flies.
Correct. The evidence they compiled supports the framework.
You mentioned those two main types again, scaling and steepening. Can you remind us maybe with an example they found for each?
Right. Sure. So first, the scaling interventions. Remember, the slow aging down overall, stretching everything out. The classic example in many of these animal studies seems to be caloric restriction. It extends life, but often appears to scale the curve.
Okay, CR is a scaler.
Yeah.
And the other type, the steepening ones, the ones we're more interested in for health span.
Right, the steepening interventions. These extend life and seem to shrink that relative sick period. The study pointed to several examples in mice that seem to do this.
Like what?
Things like senolytic treatments, those drugs that clear out old senescent cells.
Senolytics, yeah. We hear a lot about those.
Exactly. Also, certain antioxidants showed this pattern in mice, and interventions affecting VEGF signaling, that's vascular endothelial growth factor, involved in blood vessel formation.
Interesting. So targeting senescent cells, maybe antioxidant pathways, vascular health. These might be avenues for compressing morbidity, at least in mice.
That's what the data suggests, yeah. And it gets even more complex because they also found some interventions that only seem to steepen the curve in one sex.
Oh, really? Like what?
For instance, in male mice only, treatments like 17-estradiol, which is related to estrogen, feeding them a ketogenic diet, and also some drugs used for blood sugar control like carbose and canagliflozin. These showed a steepening effect specifically in males.
Wow, okay. That really drives home the point that aging is complicated and interventions might work differently depending on well, sex, and probably lots of other factors.
Absolutely. It's definitely not a one-size-fits-all picture.
So what about us, humans? I mean, our aging is way more complex than a lab mouse living in a controlled environment, right? Lifestyle, medicine.
Totally. Human aging is incredibly intricate. Genetics, lifestyle choices, environment, socioeconomic status, medical care access, it all plays a huge role. The study does briefly touch on human survival curves.
What's the trend there?
Well, it notes that over the last century or so, especially in developed countries, human survival curves have become more rectangularized, steeper.
So we are seeing that effect. More people living to older ages before dying.
We are, yes. But the researchers point out this is largely thought to be due to reducing extrinsic mortality things outside our basic biology, like fighting infectious diseases, fewer accidents, especially killing people young.
So it's not necessarily that our intrinsic aging process has slowed dramatically, but we're avoiding external causes of death better.
That's a major component, yes. Yeah. And the link between this human curve, rectangularization, and actual compression of morbidity in humans, that's still really fuzzy.
Fuzzy how?
Well, the data on whether our health span is keeping pace with our lifespan is much more debated and complex. Are people living longer but spending more years with chronic diseases? Or are we genuinely compressing that period of ill health? It's not as clear-cut as the lifespan data.
Okay, so we can't just assume that because these interventions work a certain way in mice, they'll automatically compress morbidity in humans.
No, that's a critical caveat. The human context adds layers of complexity. But what this research does give us is a really valuable way to think about the goals of longevity research. It pushes us to evaluate interventions not just on does it make life longer, but does it make healthy life longer? And does it change the pattern of aging towards less time spent sick? Focusing on that survival curve shape provides a potential tool for that assessment.
It really shifts the focus towards quality of life in those later years.
Exactly.
This has been really insightful, a fascinating deep dive into... leaves you with a lot to mull over.
It does, and it prompts that bigger question, doesn't it? Considering findings like these, what sort of future are we actually aiming for with aging? Is it just, stretching out the current experience, maybe even stretching out the difficult parts? Or can scientific progress lead to a true compression of morbidity? Can we achieve significantly longer lives that are also healthy and robust, almost right up to the very end? This work by Yang and colleagues gives us a framework for thinking critically about those possibilities.
A framework for evaluating the promise of different approaches. Really thought-provoking stuff. Well, that's all the time we have for this deep dive. Thank you so much for breaking that down for us.
My pleasure. Always interesting to discuss.
And to everyone listening, please don't forget to like the video and subscribe if you want more content like this. We'll see you next time.